All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I am so glad that you've been able to join for today's Lunch and Learn. As most of you should know by now, my name is Tony DiUlio. I'm one of the owners and partners at Wheeler, DiUlio, and Barnaby. We're a law firm that focuses entirely on property damage litigation. So we deal with insurance companies all day, every day. And I've been putting on these lunch and learns as an opportunity to try and give back a little bit. They're completely free. We record them for future use to make sure that people have an opportunity to see them whenever they want. Really, the goal here is to try and start to equalize the playing field. We've got some monolith insurance companies on one side that have endless funds. So we try to create a uniform approach as an industry to push back a little bit and see what we can do. The Lunch and Learn series we're doing right now is called The Perfect Claim. We're actually on session 9 of The Perfect Claim. If you haven't seen the prior ones, I would highly recommend going back and taking a look and watching those. I think the series has been really fantastic. Today, we're going to get to focus on some of the common problems, the hurdles that are coming up during the adjustment process over and over again, how to deal with those problems, and then how to deal with problems generally. We're going to talk about some specifics, but also talk about it in a kind of general sense. We're also going to start to touch on some common areas of the policy that are being argued incorrectly, things you might be missing. So as always, throughout this process, if you have any questions or comments, please put them on in. We've got viewers on YouTube, on Facebook, and on our webpage. All the counts are different, so I don't even know what people can see, but the numbers keep going up. So I keep rattling on a little at the beginning here to give everyone a chance to sign in. But I will address the questions, so please let us know. The other big one, and I put a comment in here before it started, but I do want you guys to chime in about this in particular, is what are common problems you are seeing day to day in the field so that we can start to talk about them and kind of start to have a more open conversation in this format. I really want people to feel like this is an opportunity to ask some questions, get specific answers, so that it is valuable for anybody that does come and watch in the future or anybody that is here in person. I know Joe already put a comment in there regarding one of his issues that we're going to address a little later on for these losses, and we'll get through a lot of that. We changed the format last time. There seemed to be some good feedback, so please chime in if this format is better than with the TV kind of newscaster style. Let me know. If you want me to go back to the old way, we can always do that too. But with that, let us jump on in. We've got this nice little side-by-side now. See how fancy this is? We're going to go through. I always provide it at the beginning and the end, so be sure to take down that contact information. That is my personal cell phone and my email. You can reach me morning, day, or night. Shoot me a text message if it's the weekend. Call me. Whatever you need to do, get in touch. What I tell everybody, I've got a lot of things that are going on, whether it be trials, deposition, running this office, whatever the case may be. If I don't pick up the call, just shoot me a text. I will absolutely get back to you. It is one of my top priorities. So always feel free to bug me. You have full authority to bug me. Whatever you need to do, feel free to do it. So let's dive into this and get going. This is the Perfect Claim Part 9, Handling Problems During a Claim. As I do with every single series startup for this, I have this disclaimer. I put it in there on purpose because not every claim is perfect. Just because something didn't go according to this series doesn't mean the claim can be denied, doesn't mean it should be a basis to delay it or to otherwise not pay what is owed. The policy is what controls and determines what is covered and what is not covered. So don't go and try and use this as an opportunity to get out of payments, insurance companies. All right. One promo that I always have to put in is for the PAGPS. This is a conference that I have put together. I'm incredibly proud of it. We've been getting incredible feedback. The numbers have kind of skyrocketed recently because we sent out a mailer last week. If you didn't get it, it means you're not on my mailing list. So you should absolutely join. You can either shoot me an email and I can add you on, or you can do it right on our website wdblegal.com. But the PAGPS conference is the Public Adjuster Greater Philadelphia Summit. It is a conference for public adjusters really across the country, but we do have CE credits for New York, Maryland, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. There's going to be 10 credits, October 6th and 7th, right in Cherry Hill. It is the lineup is unbelievable. I'm stuff that I've never seen at other conferences. We've got one of the instructors, the trainers for Xactimate, who is coming. There's an extremely limited number of those in the country. If you didn't know, it's not a level 1, 2, or 3 cert. This is the actual trainer who's coming to talk. There is going to be a talk from a roofing company about new technology that actually can prove a loss scientifically for hail and wind damage, so that you're not arguing over, hey, is that dent from a nail pop, or is that dent from a hail strike, or just good old fashioned wear and tear. I mean, it's really incredible tech that really blows my mind. Dealing with the national adjuster, Matt Mulholland, who's going to be there. If you don't know, Matt runs the Claims Institute and is going to do this kind of blitz 2-hour course on a lot of the great ways to be arguing these cases. One of the most unique things that we've got that I've never seen at another conference is a Q&A with 2 members of the Pennsylvania Insurance Department, so that they can answer questions directly about insurance company conduct, complaints that are going to them, what they do with them, how to make a good complaint to the insurance department, what happens if there's a complaint against you to the insurance department. Really amazing stuff there. And then my favorite part is going to be a debate with a defense attorney who represents insurance companies, that is going to be driven by questions from you as the members of the PAGPS. So that is going to be a ton of fun and a great way to wrap up this conference. So you absolutely should come. Not to mention, it's incredibly inexpensive. For 10 credits, if you're a member of Mapia, it's only $79. And if you're not a member, it's only $179. If you don't need the credits, we actually just created another level at $129 to just participate in the conference without needing the credits. If you need to get a link, right there, I don't know which side you're on, right there is the link. You can scan it right on your phone and get to the site to sign up directly. Maybe some of you actually did sign up at the beginning or click the link. I'm curious if anyone actually scanned that and did it on the home screen. With this, we did talk last month about the tricks of presenting a claim. Really, it turned into a focus on negotiations. If you are curious about how to negotiate insurance losses, candidly negotiate almost anything in your life, that webinar is for you. If you missed it, you should absolutely go back. We talked about the tricks of negotiating these claims, resolving them at a higher value, how to get to that point, and getting faster responses from the carriers. So we will dive in. Today, we're going to focus in part 9 on some common problems that you are seeing in the field when you're adjusting these losses, things that just keep coming up over and over again. We'll talk about how to handle any problems that come up, hurdles, whether it be with the carriers themselves, with the homeowners, a whole bunch of different options there. We're also going to get into some common policy issues that people I keep seeing over and over, despite me talking about it multiple times, aren't arguing correctly. It's just going to be a sample size. I could go on, there's probably 100 samples I could find. We just don't have that kind of time. So we will talk about that. And we will talk about what to do when all of that fails, because sometimes it's going to fail. So starting with the common problems, these are the things that I get calls almost every day from adjusters saying, hey, I've got these things coming up. What do I need to do? And it starts off with delays. It's the number one complaint that I get from homeowners, from public adjusters. Things are taking too long. I've got 6 different adjusters on a claim. They keep all asking for more time. They keep asking for the same stuff just to delay it. What do I do? I deal a lot with refusals, right? The carrier's coming out and saying, look, I'm not going to do a reinspection. I don't need to. How do you handle that scenario? Or refusals to send experts out. Say, look, I know you're claiming this, but what's the evidence? Will you send out an engineer? Will you send out a mold expert? Will you send out a smoke expert? And they just say no. How do you deal with that? The other one that I get really often is issues with policy interpretation, right? When you have one idea of what the policy says, the carrier's got another. How do you deal with kind of reconciling that difference? And the last but not least are the adjusters that are just ignoring facts, right? Ignoring information that you're presenting that would clearly present an issue for a loss or issue for coverage, but they don't want to review it, or kind of appear to be ignoring it. How do you deal with that? Again, I really appreciate the comments. I'm gonna get to these towards the end, so I don't want you to think that I'm missing them. I do see them over there, but I want anyone who's on this to feel free to comment with common problems that you're seeing over and over again, so that we kind of can address them as a whole, and even get feedback from other adjusters. If you guys have thoughts on how you're dealing with this, I'd love to create that kind of open conversation so that we can get to the best possible result. All right, so starting with kind of general problems, right? What should be your goal when you have a general problem in a case, specifically when you're dealing with the adjusters on the other side? I've told in almost probably every one of these, I really believe you get more bees with honey than you do vinegar. It's this industry, there's so often that we feel adversarial with the other side, and things can get heated, and emotions can run high. People can get a little hot. You've got to do your best to never show that side, to be the reasonable side, to be the bigger person, especially in your writing. Writing is forever, right? It is documented, it is proof later on, and it is really indisputable when it comes to the words that are on the page. It's one thing to have a heated conversation, and I'm not telling you, by the way, to have a heated conversation, but it's one thing to have a heated conversation versus putting it in an email. I've seen multiple emails from adjusters to carriers that use profanity, that make it personal. That doesn't go anywhere, right? It only creates more barriers for you to ultimately resolve a problem. So you want to avoid that. Avoid the accusations. Don't point the finger at a specific person. You will realize, if you get closer relationships with these adjusters from the carrier side, that most of them are just being kind of puppeted by someone higher up, by some uh, process that State Farm, for example, has put in as a whole when it comes to paying for roof damage. Right? This isn't an individual decision. It is something they're just being forced into. So if you can overcome that and try to show that you are the reasonable side, you're going to get a lot further with dealing with those issues. In any claim, and I'm going to say this 15 times throughout this presentation, and I've said it before, you want to use questions to your advantage. And adjusters often ask me for examples. What do I mean by that? And how do you ask questions? Well, I wanted to put here one of the best, if not the best question you can ask on any claim. And if you are ever dealing with a denial that you're trying to overturn or additional funds on it, this question should be asked every single time. I don't know how else to stress this other than I'm going to say it 15 times. You're going to think I'm a broken record. I get it, but I need to drive this home for you. You need to ask this question. And it's right here on the screen, so I'm not hiding the ball. What could I provide you to approve the claim? It is the best question you can ask, because it puts the ball into the carrier side, because the carrier makes a claim on almost every loss. And they say, look, we're not out here to deny a loss, right? We are out here to just find out what happened, to determine if it's covered. Most people want to have this concept of, look, they're fair, they're honest, they're just trying to get to the bottom of it. And if that's accurate, if they want to stand by that proposition, that they are here to just find out what happened, then they should be able to answer this question, right? What could I provide you that would allow you to approve this claim? And that's how you want to phrase it. You don't want to phrase it as, what can I give you to get you to change your mind? The only reason is it creates this more defensive position of it's a matter of whether I'm right or I'm wrong. That's not the mentality. This is, what do I need to show you to just show you the facts of what actually happened to get the claim approved under the policy. I cannot stress enough. I'm going to move on after I say it one more time. If you are disputing a claim, this question should be asked in writing in every single dispute letter that you send. All right. Hopefully I've said that enough. If I haven't, I'll be saying it again, so don't worry. In general, you want to use the insurance department when there is an advantageous reason to, and it's something that will actually get a result. I've talked about insurance department complaints a lot. And if you come to the PAGPS, you can talk to them directly about it, so you can hear it from the horse's mouth. But here's what I know at this point, from talking to them, seeing hundreds of these complaints go through, and seeing the ones that get responses and don't get responses. Plus, it helps that I have some relationships over there that have gained this information. First and foremost, the insurance department does not care about a coverage dispute. They don't. That is in no situation somewhere where they're going to step in. If they've got a roofer or an engineer that comes out and says it's wear and tear, and you've got a roofer that comes out and says that it's wind or hail damage, sorry, insurance department is not your avenue for recovery. The only thing the insurance department really cares about is enforcing the Unfair Claims Practice Act. That is what they're there for. So if you've got the carrier dead to rights on a violation of the Unfair Claims Practice Act, now you've got some avenue, some basis for writing a complaint to the department. Usually that means there is continued ignoring of correspondence, right? Most insurance practice acts say that there is 10 business days to respond to pertinent communications. So if you're sending letters, you're on your fourth notice and they just aren't responding, that's the kind of thing the insurance department would like to know about and will get involved with. If they are, and this is coming up more and more, if they are withholding funds until the entire claim is resolved, that is something the insurance department wants to know about, because they're not allowed to do that. Most of these acts will say you can't withhold funds just because other areas of the claim are in dispute. So those are the types of things that they will actually respond to. And when it comes to the issues of delay and failure to correspond, one of the really nice aspects is when you write a complaint to the department, they're going to send a letter to the carrier asking for an explanation, asking for a response. That is one letter that will get a response, and you're entitled to get that from the insurance department, whether they send it to you in their kind of conclusion letter, or if you make a request for it. You can ask for whatever the carrier sent them to support their position, and that can go a long way to you understanding their side of the claim and what's going on. The other thing that is underutilized in this industry is social media. And I put a thanks on here because I wanted to make sure I didn't forget. Not that I could ever forget Sarah. Candidly, she's a very memorable person, one of the nicest and happiest people I've ever met. And she will tell you why she's that way. She smiles. I mean, 99% of the day, I think that girl is smiling. She is one of the best adjusters in the country that I've ever met. Absolutely phenomenal. But she did a talk at one of the MAPIA conferences, and she explained to us the power of social media. And the fact is that these carriers are afraid of social media reviews. And they have entire teams dedicated just to responding and resolving issues on social media. So if you're having problems, again, when it comes to things like communication and responses from the carrier, social media is a great place to turn to get an actual response, because what will happen is their social media team will flag it, they will respond to you, and they will get a response from the party, the powers that be at the insurance company, who should be responding to you. It's really, I've used it personally. It really can make a big difference in dealing with these carriers. So I cannot stress enough the use of social media. And it's going to come up in some of the more specific slides that we're going to go through now. So the first of the specific problems that we've talked about are dealing with delays, right? It happens constantly. We currently have a case in the office right now that we filed despite it being low value, purely because the carrier had switched adjusters 6 or 7 times in delaying the claim. We want to start laying some foundation and some groundwork to make carriers know that this is not okay, that you can't do this as one of your bases to just slow down a claim and try and get it either delayed past its statute or underpaid. So when you have a delayed claim, there's a few things that you're going to want to do every time. And the first and foremost is you just want to paper them to death. You want to be sending follow-ups often. You should have form letters for this. You should have a letter that you can press a button and it will generate a letter to the appropriate adjuster on the appropriate claim with the appropriate information. The letter should say, can you please respond to my letter of X date, as I still have not received a response. End of letter. That's it. It doesn't need to rehash all the points. You don't need to worry about redrafting an entire letter to talk about the same things you already talked about. All it needs to say is, I haven't received a response yet. Can you please respond? And that does the trick to just re-trigger the carrier's system on their end that letters are being filed, and you've now papered the file to make sure you've documented everything you need to document. The other aspect is you want to be citing in your, at least your initial letters, to the Unfair Claims Practice Act. There's nothing about practicing law to put a citation in there from the Unfair Claims Practice Act. Most states, their Unfair Claims Practice Act actually says that the insurance company and their adjusters need to be familiar with this anyway. So you're putting it in there to make sure they are aware that, hey, you've got 10 business days to respond to this, and here's the statute that says that. This is a pertinent communication, right? A lot of adjusters have started using that in their letters, just like I do, so the carrier knows, hey, I'm expecting a written response to this. So using those statutes, the regulations against them, can go a long way to actually getting a response. You want to go up the chain whenever you can. I have seen clients and adjusters, especially on smaller companies, go all the way up to CEO level of claims to just start getting responses. If you have a delayed claim, it at least gets you a responsive position. If you send a letter to the CEO, they have their own letter writing department, and you'll get a letter that says, hey, this is from the office of the CEO. We've reviewed your file. Here's our understanding of where things stand right now. It's not that you're going to get the claim overturned or you're going to get your coverage decision, but what you are looking for throughout this process is more information, right? To not let the claim just die out, because you want to know, what do they think? What is their position? Because once I know what they think, it gives me a leg up on what I need to provide to change that position, right? If their position is, in reviewing this, from the CEO's department, we had made a request 3 months ago for X, Y, and Z documents. We never got that. And as a result, nothing more has happened. Okay, great. Now I know I need to get those documents for them and to move the claim forward. Again, as we talked about before, in delay claims, you can use social media. A great avenue, again, to get these claims at least responded to from someone from the carrier. I don't know why I wrote go up the chain twice. That was a typo. Last but not least is involvement with the insurance department. As we talked about before, one of those things that the insurance department actually cares about are carriers ignoring clients. It is one of their biggest pet peeves. They never want it to appear that carriers will ignore their clients. You become the client when you are their representative. So ignoring you is the same as ignoring them. Good question, John. And I'll address this now just because it doesn't quite fall in line with the ones later on. John Jackson had asked, how would you handle a carrier's agent writing a binder for coverage at $1 million on a property valued at $400,000? It's a fantastic question. The issue of how much you're going to bind coverage for is really twofold. First, there is how much is it going to actually cost to rebuild this property, right? The difference between the value of the property itself versus what it can be rebuilt for is often significant. And I will always advise clients that you should be insuring your property for what it costs to rebuild, not necessarily the cost to just purchase the property or another property of like kind. You're just doing yourself a disservice if it's undervalued in the insurance policy. Not to mention, on a lot of policies, you've got a co-insurance risk that you want to make sure that you're not getting hit on. If you don't understand co-insurance, in short, if you're not insured usually up to 80% of the value of the property, there is a co-insurance penalty that will kick in. It was something that was very confusing to me early in my career. I actually had to sit down with Jonathan Wheeler, who's actually behind the scene right now, to explain it because I just didn't understand. But I do now, which is very nice. So long story short, you want to make sure you've got that. The other aspect of insuring a property is how much does the client want it insured for, right? It'd be fine if the property costs $1 million to rebuild, but the client only wants $400,000 in coverage, then all they owe to get is $400,000 in coverage. There are issues with this when it comes to the notice to the insured if they continue to pay their premiums on the $1 million policy, even though they wanted $400,000. So there's a few variables there, but we would have to look into whether or not there was wrongdoing on behalf of the agent. Claims we handle all the time. I've got some fantastic experts on the E&O side for coverage, so it's absolutely worth looking into if it's caused some harm or damage to the insured. Hopefully that addresses it, John. If you've got other questions on it, please feel free to let me know. All right, so I'm keeping my promise. I'm always addressing questions. The other ones that have come up, I want to talk about a little further down because they'll be more easily addressed towards the end. So the refusals on claims are also really really common, right? That carriers are coming out and refusing re-inspections. They're refusing a lot of things. One of the biggest refusals that we have been seeing, and I would wager a bet that all of you have seen this over the past year, is State Farm refusing to pay for a roof until the attempted repair has been made on the property. It is a ridiculous request. It's a request that can cause additional damage to the property, and one that is not required under the policy. And there's ways that you can deal with that. I want to address that specifically because it's so common, and I just did a letter on this the other day. First and foremost, with the demand from State Farm to attempt the repair, there is nothing in the policy, nowhere, not one spot, that allows the carrier to force the insured to attempt a repair to prove the need for additional coverage. It doesn't exist in the policy, and the first question that you can ask, and that you should ask when dealing with this is, hey, State Farm adjuster, can you show me in the policy where my insured is required to attempt a repair to facilitate coverage for a loss? And their answer is going to be, it's not in there, right? They have to, because there's no other explanation in their current policy that I have seen that would require that to come up. If someone knows of something different, please let me know. I am happy to take a look, but I certainly don't know of it. The second thing is for these losses is to explain to them through the use of a roofer or through your own, if you have roofing experience, through your own experience, that facilitating this repair will create further damage. That in your experience, that by attempting this repair, either with a shingle that isn't properly matched up in size, or by breaking the additional shingles if the roof is too brittle, you're creating additional weaknesses in the roof that can cause further damage, not only to the roof itself, but entry points for water to get in. You are not willing to take the liability on for that to happen. If the carrier would like to accept that liability, give them an opportunity to, but they're never going to accept that liability, so you don't have to worry about that. But if you give them that chance and they say no to it, you've now provided even more evidence of, look, even you're not willing to do this. You've got to pay for the roof, right? Shift the ball to their court. If you're confident that a repair can't be done, tell them, say, look, go ahead, give it a shot, but I need you to sign off on liability before you do that. Before the repair is made, I need you to agree that you will cover any ensuing damages that are the result of either an improper or incomplete repair to the roof. They'll never sign off on it, and it gives you a ton of ammunition to say, look, if you won't sign off on this, then you can't possibly support the position that it can be repaired. It's the same thing with smoke claims. I tell people this all the time. If you've got a smoke loss in their electronics in a property, those electronics should be replaced. Period. End of story. The smoke is corrosive on the wiring and can cause a fire down the line. The TV might work perfectly today if you were to turn it on and flip the channels, but in a year and a half, you're going to start seeing problems. So you should be sending a letter to the carrier on every smoke claim where they deny the liability saying, look, if you don't want to pay for the electronics, that's fine. Can you just sign this letter indicating that you'll accept liability in the event that there are future problems or future fires as the result of the smoke damage to this television or these electronics? They will never sign the letter. I've never seen them sign it once. And it gives you, again, a great avenue to recovery. Got a little sidetracked here. The basis of that is with these refusals, it gives you good ammunition to put the onus on them, put the ball in their court to try and push them to your coverage position. When it comes to refusals, you want to get them to put it in writing why they feel they don't need these things, right? Why are you refusing to do a re-inspection specifically? Not, oh, we've already been out to the property. Great, I know you've been there, but why is it that the one inspection is enough? What do you think you have that you don't need a re-inspection? The second thing is, as I talked about before, this is a perfect opportunity to use those questions to say, well, wait, you don't want to do a re-inspection. What information could I provide you that would help you see our position, to help you see that there is coverage under this? Or wouldn't, just open-ended, wouldn't more information be helpful to get to the facts of what actually happened here? right? Really reasonable questions that any normal person would say yes to. Of course, more information would be helpful. Excuse me. So that there's no reason not to do the reinspection. This is another scenario when going up the chain can help. And if you all of that fails, you can do the reinspection yourself and provide them those proofs that support your position from the reinspection. Better photographs, or if you again come to the PAGPS conference and get the high tech stuff for, let's say, the roof inspection or the siding, proving the loss, things that can't be disputed because it's actual factual scientific proof. Those types of things can go a long way to dealing with these refusals in the field. So beyond the delays and the refusals, the other biggest one is these errors in interpretation, right? Where they read policy language, they think it means one thing, we think it means something different. How do you reconcile it? The truth is, these are one of the hardest ones to deal with because most of the time there isn't any kind of real set determination as to what this means, right? Policies aren't written to be clear. They're one of the hardest documents to understand in literally all the world, let alone the legal world or the insurance world. So it can be tough to deal with these problems, but there's a few things that can help. First, whenever you're disputing policy language, you want to cite the language you're talking about and cite it in its entirety. Don't do what the insurance company does, where they just will pick and choose a portion without citing things like the ensuing loss language that applies to that paragraph. You want to cite everything that actually applies. This doesn't mean, by the way, cite to the entire exclusion section of the policy, or even cite to an entire exclusion that has other irrelevant parts, right? If you're going to cite to wear and tear, you don't necessarily need to cite to rot if there's no rot involved with this claim. But cite to everything that is relevant and make sure that's front and foremost with your discussion so that everyone's on the same page as to what you're talking about. Second, you want to provide your understanding as to what this means. Explain based on the language above, it's my understanding that this is how it applies or what this policy language means. Then you will go into providing sources and examples for why that is the case. One of the number one things adjusters don't do is cite back to other losses where the interpretation is as you saw it, right? If you deal with State Farm 3 times a week for the past 10 years, there's a good chance that you've got examples somewhere in your database as to times when you got this exact situation covered by State Farm. Well, using that against them is incredibly powerful, right? It's State Farm making a determination that you were correct in your interpretation. So use that against them. Have a good database and a good understanding of these files so that you can go back and search them so you can find that. You never want to be practicing law, but you can cite to the law when it is useful and helpful for your claims. The trick is that you're not using it to interpret what the law means. You're not using it to put liability, blame, or coverage on anyone else. You simply are citing the law, putting it in there, and based off of your understanding, this is what should apply. That's it. You're never saying, for example, insurance company, you are in breach of X case, or you are in breach of the Unfair Claims Practice Act, or you have in violation of. Telling them that, saying that, right, when you get to that level is when you start getting to the gray area that you don't want to tread in. You don't tell them what the result is to them for their misconduct. You're just saying that this is the law. Here's my understanding of it. It certainly does the same trick of drawing the lines without telling them that they're in violation of something or something like that. Finally, getting outside opinions. I've written more opinion letters on coverage than I could remember, but if you've ever got a situation of, hey, Tony, I've got this policy language, the carrier says this, I say this, can you take a look and let me know what you think and do a letter? No problem. It doesn't take me that long. I'm happy to help out with those. 99% of the time, I'm not even charging for them. So if you need that, I'm happy to be of assistance. It has changed a few cases recently that I can think of, so it is certainly not a fruitless effort, so long as it is something that is a pretty clear-cut position when it comes to the coverage. All right, so The other aspect, oh, some examples. I forgot about this. This is one of the examples I dealt with recently, and it's this valuation provision within the contract. And this is a commercial policy, and it has this valuation that is actually pretty common in a lot of them. And the carrier was citing this because we had an appraisal that was going on for 3.5 years from the date of the loss. Pricing has changed a heck in those 3.5 years. So they were trying to say that the value of covered property in the event of a loss or damage is as follows: at actual cash value as of the time of loss or damage, except as provided below. But the loss payment provision, and this is what they were missing, specifically states in the event of loss or damage covered by this coverage form, at our option, we will either pay the value of lost or damaged property or pay the cost of repairing or replacing the lost or damaged property, subject to be below. Well, what this made me realize in reading this is, well, this policy recognizes a difference between the value of covered property and the cost of repairing or replacing the covered property. Those are two different things. And it doesn't say that the cost of repairing or replacing the lost or damaged property is measured at the time of the loss, like it does with the cost of the property. So I looked a little further, and I found out that the policy has an example for the coinsurance, and it specifically distinguishes the value of the property from the amount of the loss. Those two things are inherently different things. And when we realize this, well, we realize that when they're talking about the value of the property, they're talking about the entirety of the insured property. Everything as a whole, what is the value of everything you are insuring? Your amount of loss is completely different. That's the cost to repair or replace. And so, carrier, you've got two choices. You could, at any given loss, pay me for everything, right? And just say the value of everything you had at the time of your loss was $250,000. Go ahead, pay me $250,000 at actual cash value from the time of the loss. You can get out of the claim. Well, most losses aren't a total loss, so instead they look to what does it cost to repair or replace. Completely different number, and it's not measured at the time of the loss. That distinction is not in there. Makes a big difference in the number. In our case in particular, we're dealing with a $1.8 million difference between those two numbers. So it can be significant, and it is something always worth looking into. I'll say it now. I'll probably say it once or twice later. RFTP. No, RTFP. Sorry. RTFP. If you don't know what that means, I'll give you a hint. Read the F policy. Some people will say that F stands for full. I like to think that it might not stand for full. Either way, read the effing policy. All right, moving forward on these. We've got when you are getting an adjuster who's just ignoring things, ignoring you or the facts of the loss and evidence that you were presenting just on its face. It's clear evidence that they just want to ignore. It's less common, but it does happen enough that it was worth addressing here. This is another scenario where you're going to want to ask questions, right? The questions, again, will lead you to the ultimate result of what they want, what they need to prove that this is covered under the policy. So you should be asking those questions. And that, again, ask them, what can I provide to you to show you that this is covered under the policy? Great question. You should be using it every time. Similar with with the other ones is you want to go up the chain whenever it's possible. And in these particular scenarios, you want to be continuing to provide more proof as far as you can go, right? If it's a roofing loss and you've done your own inspection, maybe you get a roofer out there to do an inspection. If it is a structural issue from a collapse, get an engineer out there to do an inspection. Provide additional proof to force them into a position that they have to respond. You can ask for counter evidence, right? Rather than say, what can I give you? Say, look, you're not considering this. Can you provide me with the basis of why you feel you don't need to consider this information, right? Always putting the ball in their court with questions goes a long way to keeping those conversations going and ultimately leading to coverage. Depending on how bad the ignorance is on their part, how much they're ignoring, you might want to involve the insurance department. But again, it's only in those limited scenarios where they're being unresponsive to facts, not simply coverage determinations or loss considerations. I want to talk about a few sections of policies that are being continually missed. And again, there are a ton of these, but there are really important aspects in it, and hopefully they will provide evidence of why you should be reading every policy on every claim you've got to make sure that you're hitting them. Before we do that, I want to go into some of these questions that have come up. So first and foremost, we've got one from Joe here. The homeowner went for the lowest bid on a renovation project. The roofer subcontractor got surprised by a cloudburst. Turns out probably not insured. The sub had the GC pull the permits, so probably going to be a mess. Homeowner is a mess. This happens often with these claims, and I recognize this isn't really a question, but I think it gets to an important question of what do you do in a situation where contractors don't have insurance, they screw up the claim, and the homeowner is now stuck with money out of their pocket and nowhere to go? First and foremost, this is a complicated scenario, and it's one that I would recommend calling me or another attorney that practices in this area on, because you've got a lot of moving parts here. And depending on where the claim is, things can change, whether it's New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Virginia, New York, Florida. So you want to make sure that you're dealing with someone that understands that. But there's a lot of avenues that you can actually go. First, if the general contractor isn't insured, but the losses can potentially move to the sub, you might have liability claims against the sub if they are insured. There's also some good law out there that if a contractor is insured but insolvent, right, they've got no money and they had a claim that was denied by their carrier, you can actually still get money from the carrier even if it's not an insured loss. So carrier denies the contractor claim and the contractor is insolvent, they've got no money, you may still be able to recover. There's also a few scenarios, depending on the fact specifics of the loss, where it could be considered ensuing damage from the underlying claim, or you might have ensuing loss coverage for contractor negligence under the policy. I just reviewed a policy today, actually this morning, where the carrier covers contractor negligence so long as it isn't coupled with any other cause of loss within the policy. So there's a lot of things that can come up that can get nuanced coverage for these. Mike had one comment. One contractor started the estimation and was working on getting all the paperwork going and ended up not doing the job and did not get paid for the work that had been done. Similar situation, right? Where we've got a contractor who has run away. You've got all these avenues, but they are absolutely worth having a conversation with an attorney to see if there's any options moving forward. One from Stephen here. State Farm desk adjuster on small claims. They are just refusing to talk or discuss the claim. The state, they state that they are standing behind their estimate or decision. Send an appraisal demand. They reply does not meet the threshold for appraisal. Now, this hits two really important things that are coming up. First is the lack of response. Stephen, and for anyone else on this, you want to be using those questions to be driving the claim forward, right? What information can I provide you that would show that this is covered under the policy? Use everything that we talked about above. But the reason this one is so important is because it's happening so often. State Farm and a few other carriers, but really State Farm is the worst of the worst when it comes to this. They're just refusing to go to appraisal. State Farm cannot refuse to go to appraisal. That is not an option under the policies. Appraisal is a demand that can be made by either side. Any outright refusal to go to appraisal under the policy is likely to be deemed bad faith. And I don't say that lightly. I know a lot of people on this have probably seen my prior webinars where I've told you bad faith claims are rare. And as a result, every time I get a call from an adjuster, they start off, Tony, I've got a great bad faith case. I kind of laugh to myself because it's just not that common. The truth is, refusals to go to appraisal can be a good bad faith case. And I've been successful on a number of them in the past 2 years. So if you've got an outright refusal, it is absolutely worth litigating on those cases. If instead you've got a scenario where State Farm is trying to limit the scope of the appraisal, some states allow that, unfortunately. States like New Jersey will come back and say appraisal is intended for the scope that has already been agreed upon by the carrier, and it's just about the pricing of those scope items. However, other states like Pennsylvania do not allow that. They don't allow a limitation of appraisal to the carrier's scope. So a refusal to go to appraisal on the full loss, again, could similarly be considered bad faith. Finally, maybe the most obvious of them all, If the carrier is refusing to pay an appraisal award where the policy does not give them the retained power to deny a loss, then they could be in violation of not only Unfair Claims Practice Act, but also a bad faith claim as well. So all of those scenarios are situations where appraisal really should be working in your favor, and you should contact an attorney to discuss those without question. Another one that comes up from Steve, where State Farm is demanding a copy of the contract with the insured. This becomes a little more state specific, so you're going to want to look into the state specific regulations on this. But most of the time, there is not a requirement that the insured provide a contract with the public adjuster to the carrier. All that you need is a signed letter of representation, and that should be enough. There is nothing in most states that requires that contract be produced, so that signed letter of representation should be enough. Just like if you've got an independent contractor working with, or an independent adjuster working with a carrier, you can't go and demand, hey, independent adjuster, let me see your contract with State Farm. I want to know how you're being paid, blah, blah, blah. Doesn't work that way. All right. So moving through, I think that hits all the questions. And John, we can talk more specifically about this because I saw your comment that the rebuild could have been for under the 400,000. But there's a little more fact specifics that we'll want to get into about that. So talking about the policy specifics, I can't stress enough, read the policy, guys. They are not all the same, and they aren't always consistent. Policy forms change, so you want to make sure you're reading it. I want to address Allstate here, and I don't have them labeled only because I'm using a limited space for my slide. Luckily, I see these enough to know which one's which. But this is Allstate's language for their all risk policy for what they cover. It's also actually the same for their named peril section with how it starts. But I wanted to point out something that's specific here and relatively specific to Allstate, and it's that they've got this sudden and accidental language. Allstate was one of the biggest carriers for forever in this country for insurance, and they were dealt with so often that so many people believe that language, sudden and accidental, is kind of the standard for what needs to be proven for there to be a loss. The fact of the matter is this language does not exist in most insurance policies. Most policies will have language that says accidental direct physical loss, risk of direct physical loss, or direct physical loss. It doesn't use the term sudden. And it's so important because it changes the burdens of proof as to what people need to prove when it comes to a covered loss. With an Allstate policy, yes, there is a responsibility to show a sudden event, but that does not exist with other carriers. You only have to prove accidental direct physical loss or direct physical loss. Anything to disclaim that coverage falls on the burden of the carrier. So they are the ones that have to prove it was long-term. They are the ones that have to prove it was something from 6 years ago rather than this year. That all falls on them. It can make a big, big difference in getting coverage on a claim if you recognize you don't have the burden to prove the sudden event concept that everyone seems to think falls on every insurance claim. It doesn't. Moving on, we have issues with State Farm policies. Now, anyone that knows me knows that this one in particular is a personal pet peeve, and we've got State Farm more often than I can count now, admitting that this is ambiguous. But their policy states that they don't pay for continuous or repeated leakage of steam or water from a plumbing system, and the important language is at the bottom, which occurs over a period of time. Now, if anybody on this call can tell me a single definition of the phrase period of time, I open the door. Feel free, tell me what a single definition of a period of time is, and I will be happy to consider it. The fact of the matter is it has infinite numbers of definitions. A second is a period of time, a minute, a month, a year, a millennia, whatever you want is a period of time. This is on its face ambiguous. On every claim you have where State Farm is using this as a denial, your absolute first question to them should be, how long did this leak need to be occurring for it to be denied under this policy? They will not be able to answer that question. They never can, they never do. And the next question is, how long did you determine that this leak was actually going on for? Again, they don't usually have that, and it's a great avenue to get to coverage. There are very few State Farm denials that I won't fight. So if you've got under this provision. If you've got a claim under this provision, I'm happy to discuss it with you because I will more than likely be taking every one of them because it's always ambiguous and it can always be interpreted in our favor. Trying to fly through these because we're going to be running low on time and I don't want to run out. This is the Allstate language. I've mentioned this one once before, so I won't belabor it too much. Allstate has two options on how they pay for a claim, and only two. Either Allstate can repair or replace the damaged item, or Allstate pays for the item itself. That's it. Those are the only two options Allstate gives you. So if you've got a wood floor that is damaged and it could be sanded and refinished, great. Allstate, sand and refinish it. If they don't do that, Allstate's only option is to pay for that wood floor. I hope you get that because of how monumental a change that can be in the adjustment of a loss, but those are the only two options out there for Allstate. So use that to your advantage. Get them to pay for the damaged item entirely rather than try to pay for a repair because they do not have a pay for repair option. We've got another great one from this is also from Allstate. Seepage means the continuous or repeated seepage or leakage over weeks, months, or years of water or steam, blah, blah, blah. The reason this one is so important is because all this excludes, and we actually have testimony from Allstate as to this, all this excludes is the water damage from day 14 and on. The water damage that occurs from days 1 through 13 is all covered water damage. It doesn't matter that it kept going after that. All of that aspect of the claim is covered. So when you're presenting a loss to Allstate and you believe that this might have gone on for more than 2 weeks, all you need to do is limit your damages to what you can reasonably say happened in the first 13 days. So let's say you've got a leak that was leaking for 13 days and it got down through 2 floors, but it kept leaking. And the homeowner didn't know because it was inside the wall, and then it shows its ugly face and you see the damage behind it. It doesn't matter that insulation was getting wet for 2 months. Doesn't matter. If that insulation got wet in the first 13 days, you've got coverage for it. That is the same for the electrical that gets damaged behind it and any of the damages that you can point to happening in the first 13 days. So make sure you've got that locked down. You can solidify it through plumbers, through contractors, engineers, whatever you need to do, but lock it into 13 days and you should be good to go. Some notable mentions for other areas that people often getting wrong. Frozen pipe claims. This is going to be a blitz, so if you're taking notes, write quickly. On frozen pipe claims, you do not need to report it as a frozen pipe. If you report it as a burst pipe, it is on the carrier's burden to prove that there was no heat maintained in the property in the event that it was vacant. If you are concerned about heat maintenance in a property, it should not be reported as a frozen pipe claim because you don't want to open that door. Yes, I understand that if it's a frozen pipe, you get the plumbing cost as well, so it increases the value. But if you're increasing the value for a claim that's denied, it's useless. If you put it in as simply a broken pipe and a plumbing escape, then it becomes the burden of the carrier to prove that it was a freeze. First of all, they have to prove it was a frozen pipe. Then they have to prove that the heat was not maintained in the property if the property was unoccupied. So you're opening yourself up if you report it as a frozen pipe if you're not positive. On stucco and siding claims, when water gets into the property and you've got a stucco house and they cover that interior water damage, you should have coverage for all of the stucco on the house. Wow, what? That's crazy, Tony. I know it's crazy, but it's accurate. And here's why. The water that's coming through that stucco is ensuing loss, right? And that's why it's covered when it gets in the house. It's ensuing damage from the improper construction. And most policies will cover that ensuing loss. Well, the improper construction is the stucco system itself. Anything behind that stucco system, including the sheathing, is part of the ensuing loss coverage. So for that water to get into the house and to be covered under the policy, it has to first pass through the stucco. Not covered, it's improper construction, I get it. But as soon as it hits that sheathing and then gets into the insulation and then gets into the drywall and it shows itself in the house, you've got ensuing loss coverage. That sheathing, which is usually going to be some OSB, that particle board that's glued together, when that gets wet, that glue starts to break down. and it will, without question, start to rot behind there and it will break down faster. So that sheathing has to come off. It's been damaged from the water, it's covered. The only way you get that sheathing off is by taking the stucco off. And as soon as you have to take that stucco off, now the stucco is covered under the ensuing loss provision. If you've got a stucco claim and this is confusing to you, please give me a call. I will be happy to discuss it further. The burden. Make sure if you've got all risk policies, you don't necessarily need to determine what the cause of the loss was. It's not your responsibility. You only have the burden to show the damage. The cause is on the carrier, so don't give yourself more of a burden if you don't need to. Properties under construction under most policies are not considered vacant. So, if you've got a situation where that happens, be sure to make sure you know the arguments under the policy. Collapse provisions under the policy will have issues for hidden decay. The number one argument where this comes up is if you've got a collapsed wall in a basement. The carrier will often come by and say it's not covered because it's earth movement or hydrostatic pressure. That is not accurate. What is accurate is the wall had hidden decay, and as a result of the hidden decay, the wall collapses and now the earth moves. It is not the earth that moved that caused my loss. The earth moved as a result of my loss. Those are two different things, and the hidden decay collapse is still covered. Vandalism versus theft. Vandalism is the intentional destruction of the property, right? You're intentionally doing something to cause damage to a property. Theft is the taking of something from the property. They can overlap, right? If you've got copper pipes that were stolen from the house, that is both vandalism and theft. The difference is that under vandalism coverage and theft coverage, the occupancy of the property is often an issue. It can be covered under one but not the other. So make sure you understand what you are putting the claim in for to make sure you've got coverage for your insured. That is where we get into tenant issues of the property and any denial you get for tenancy issues. If it's because the house wasn't properly occupied, it comes in up all the time, right? Someone sells or buys a property, they live there for 10 years, they move out, now they rent it, they never change their policy, and that gets denied for occupancy issues. That is usually something that can be fought and won most of the time. So give me a call if you want to discuss any of those. Last but not least, this one's coming up a ton more often, is the timelines within the policy for appraisal and the timeline for litigation. As everyone should know, almost every single policy contains a limitation on when suit can be brought, whether it be 1 year, 2 years, or 4 years. Some are 3. It's rare, but it happens. The policy language will generally control for when suit can be brought. However, there is no such language for appraisal. That means if you are past your suit limitation and you've got a covered loss, one of your options on the table is still going to appraisal. Hopefully that's ringing through, because if you've missed that timeline, you've still got an avenue. And if the carrier tries to come out and say, well, we're not going to appraisal because you're past your suit limitation, I can now file suit because of that. They cannot, I want to stress this, deny appraisal because it is beyond the suit limitation. Appraisal is not a lawsuit. It is not a litigation. They cannot limit the timeline for appraisal because of the suit limitation provision. Hopefully that has rung through pretty well. Taking a look, when all else fails, you've got kind of those two avenues for appraisal versus litigation. It is a circular system because 10 years ago, carriers, nothing went to appraisal. Everything was getting pushed to litigation. Adjusters started sending a lot more to appraisal. Carriers started to hate that. So now they're trying to push it back to litigation. I believe it's just going to keep this circle back and forth for all time until someone fixes the systems. But it's important to understand that not every claim is perfect for appraisal, and not every claim is perfect for litigation. I truly will do my best to give you an honest opinion if I think appraisal is right or if litigation is right on a claim. So if you ever want to talk about it, let me know. I always make the plug for one of your local associations. I put MAPIA up here because it's the one I'm involved with, but you should absolutely look into it. The biggest benefit beyond the CE credits, the holidays, the free drinks, the live Q&As, the last one is really the biggest. It's the supporting of lobbyists in your states for the industry as a whole. Tracking that kind of stuff is how you prevent really bad law from getting in there which we have personally stopped on multiple occasions with Mapia. So it's worth looking into. Had questions that we have gotten. I'm surprised how long this session took, but I want to make sure we get through them. When a desk adjuster tells you that you are raising a lot of red flags here, how do you respond to ease their concerns? First and foremost, when you are reporting a claim, less is more. You don't want to give too much information because you just don't need to. The things you should give are a cursory comment on the amount of the loss to set the reserve high. We talked about this in prior lessons, so you should go back and watch those. You can report the claim if it's all risk and say, look, we've got direct physical loss to the property that's being reported. There hasn't been a determination yet as to the cause of that loss, but here's what the damage is. You don't need to do much more than that when you're reporting a claim, so you shouldn't be raising red flags. The less you say, the better off you'll be, so I don't know why red flags are getting raised. But if any red flags do get raised, you should ask them, oh, I appreciate that statement. What are the red flags you're concerned about? Let's address them right now to deal with them. And put the onus on them to identify the red flags so that you've got more information as to what hurdles you're going to have from the start, so you know how to address them down the line with the claim. We've got a question here from Erica. What about when they say the builder board, the sheathing, is not approved because of wear and tear? Xactimate says builder board life expectancy is 150 years. That's absolutely true. And I think this is going probably to the stucco question or the stucco comments before. But when that sheathing gets wet, it actually will break down the glue that holds it together. Most of that plywood, whether it's ply, OSB, or I forget the name of the other one, they're put together with that glue particulate that will actually break down when it gets too wet. And what they always say, and they come back and say, well, wait a second, when you build a home, that stuff's exposed to the weather elements. Yeah, you're right. But when it's exposed to the weather elements, it can also dry out after the storm. This is now stuck behind the stucco and it cannot dry out. So as soon as you can show, and you've got the documentation to show that the water damage will break down those materials if it can't be dried out, and it got wet from the ensuing water damage, you should have coverage for it. It doesn't matter if it's supposed to last for 150 years. It's supposed to last for 150 years when it doesn't get wet, not when it gets saturated and can't dry out behind the wall. So those are two kind of distinct scenarios. We got a question from Donna. How can we fix the UPPA problem? It's out of control. For anyone that it doesn't know, UPPA is the unauthorized practice of public adjusting. This is a big problem in the industry. I try constantly because contractors will contact me about claims, and I will often talk to them about this and say, look, you need to make sure you're on the right side of this. You cannot make policy interpretations. You can't negotiate claims. Communicating with the carrier is limited to just showing the damage and your estimate for that damage. That's it. That's all you can do on these as the contractor. So you've got to make sure you don't cross the line. I'm part of a few different groups now that are working with insurance companies actually to push back on this, to provide notice to the insurance departments when we see these problems and to try and address those issues. Honestly, one of the best ways as an industry we can do this, other than notifying the carriers, is really through education. Contractors who get educated about this and recognize that they can have kind of a symbiotic relationship with PAs will often have a better business model than those who don't. So they can actually help themselves if they recognize, oh, there's a public adjuster that can assist in certain ways. It can go a long way. All right, a few other questions that came up to address. How do you deal with insurance adjusters when they want to repair 168 discontinued shingles by cutting new shingles down to fit, which the manufacturer and my roofer do not recommend? Fantastic question. It's coming up all the time. I won't have time to play the entire video, but there is a video from YouTube that does an exact breakdown of this. I actually might be able to, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the video link. I thought I had it open. I don't have it open. There's a video link if you look on YouTube for CertainTeed. If you look up CertainTeed standard versus metric, you will find a YouTube video. It's about 5 minutes long and it does an amazing job explaining why you can't do this. This exact problem. It is a fantastic video. In 5 minutes, did a ton of education for me as to this topic and for adjusters. So find the video, send it along to the adjuster, and say, look, this is why I can't do it. So again, I'm asking that you replace the entirety of the roof. Adjuster closed my client's claims because he wanted 6 months of bills. How do I handle that? Well, they should never be closing a file as long as there's continued adjustment. My guess what happened, I don't remember whose comment this was or question. My guess is that you probably didn't supply the 6 months and that it just kind of sat as a result, and then they closed the file. If they're asking for bills and it's not unreasonable or burdensome, or you don't have a concern as to supplying them, just supply them. I get that we want to push back all the time, say, oh, it's unreasonable to ask for 6 months of bills. Okay, fine. Maybe you're right. Maybe it is unreasonable and maybe we could fight it. But if you're not worried about what it shows and the client could get it, just get it, right? If it's a phone call to PSE&J, just make the phone call. If you're concerned about what they show, you should contact an attorney to discuss the best avenues for what to do about that. But on any given claim, just not turning it over because you want to push back because you say it's unreasonable isn't really the best avenue to coverage. I get that it's unreasonable. I get that it's annoying, but it's usually easier to just deal with the annoyance than to try and fight back on the unreasonable aspect of it. Here was this was the link. I thought it was in here. So the video, while it won't play, this is what it's going to look like when you get into the YouTube thing. So this is what you should be looking for. Again, fantastic video for it. I think those were the ends of the questions, although Steve did have one more. With Steven's question, I'm going to leave this link up if you want to, after hearing all the fantastic stuff that's going to be at the PAGPS. If you want to sign up, check that link. So we've got another one from Steven. Chimney fire. Erie brings out a structural engineer. Chimney needs to be replaced. We have a large discrepancy in price. Requested appraisal. It a scope issue. How to handle. I'm assuming is that a scope issue, and how do you handle it? If everybody agrees the chimney needs to be replaced and the only issue is price, that is not a scope issue. That is going to be purely a pricing issue, and certainly good for appraisal. Now, Stephen, I believe almost all of your work is entirely in Pennsylvania. So it doesn't matter that if it were a scope issue, because they cannot limit appraisal in Pennsylvania to scope issues alone. So if they're pushing back on that for any scope reason, they're completely wrong, and you'd have a basis for litigation on that one. All right, there's about a 10-second delay from what I say to when you see it. So I'm going to give about 15 seconds if there's any additional questions. Otherwise, here's my contact information again. If you've ever got questions on claims, if you need anything down the road, please don't hesitate to ask. Phone calls are free, as they almost always are, and most of the letters and emails that I write. So if you've got anything that you need help on, please let me know. I really do want this industry to be better as a whole. I want all of us to be moving towards the appropriate position of just getting what's covered. This should be the position for public adjusters. It should be the position for carriers as well. There should be a way to do this all together. We just need to keep working towards it as a whole. So as always, thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining. If you've got anything else you need, let me know. Thanks. Take care.